everyone. I'm Morgan Katz with Ticketnology, and this is Changing the Game podcast. Our goal here today is to talk to other business owners, entrepreneurs, and leaders about how they're changing their game and their industry and their lives. I'm so excited to have Laurie Grace Roberts with us today. Laurie Grace, thank you for joining me today.
I'm so glad to be with you, Morgan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Laurie Grace and I met through Entrepreneurs Organization and through several different connections within that group. And recently we spent some time together at an International Women's Day event that you hosted that was just lovely. And we'll dive in more on that and some of those topics that are still resonating a couple weeks later. So I'd love for you to just share with our audience your story, who you are as a person through business and everything else that you want to share. And then we'll really start diving in on some fun things.
Okay, sounds great. I own and operate two businesses, Rethink Results as well as Dallas Women's Counseling. Rethink Results, Morgan, that's really the business that we met through. So I'll spend most of my time talking about that. I'm certain there may be some parts that bring Dallas Women's Counseling in, but I have owned and run Rethink Results for 14 years now. And really our focus is how do we make workplaces better? You know, we spend 90,000 hours over a lifetime at work. And for most people, that's a heavy number. And I was even watching my email this morning. Gallup's latest State of the Global Workplace report just came out. And that's where they measure engagement every year. And it was really the connection of that 14 years ago. The truth, the hard truth of what is in the workplace to those 90,000 hours that really led me on the journey that I've been on. Because on average, only 1/3 of Americans are thriving and are fully engaged at work. Yeah, right. And for me, I had that experience before I ran my own business. So I joke I'm a recovering CPA. So went to Baylor University, studied business, worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers for 15 years, worked in the audit practice. And I loved the firm and I loved the people I worked with, including the clients. But the work itself, it got to a point where it didn't feel like what I was wired to do. And so my own engagement even started sinking. And so it was really through that story that led me to creating Rethink Results and really stepping back to say, what would it look like if I stepped into the lives of leaders and their teams and their organizations to start making things better beside them?
Amazing. It's so interesting how our own journeys form our next round of paths, but also being open to what's out there. And that takes a lot of risk and a little bit of gump to get up and do the jump. And especially when you've been somewhere for a long time, like you were, that's a big move. When you made that move, when I made the move for technology, I just did it. I had no plan, I had no action. Are you a planner? Are you someone who set out a timeline and a path before you made that jump?
No. Right. Yes. And so Morgan, as I, just heard you say that part, what's so interesting to me is, so my faith is a really big part of my life. So I can't not say that because it was part of that journey. I just felt like God had wired me for something different than what I was doing. You mix that and that conviction with a pretty healthy level of self-confidence, not perfect self-confidence, but pretty strong self-confidence. And I knew the move was what I needed to do. And I knew that there would be success. And I don't know how I knew it. And now looking back, I see that it was probably a lot more risky than I realized at the time. So many of my friends and family members were, kind of shaking their heads, thinking and saying, what is she doing? And I just had a sense of confidence that it was going to come together. And with a lot of hard work, it did. But no, not with an exact plan.
I love that. And sometimes that's the biggest jump. That's the change in the playbook in our day to day. And so let's kind of dive in on that mindset a little bit of it's confidence, it's having some faith, but what's that mix of decision making really work? Because we can all say, I have the best intentions, this is going to work, and I know it's going to work, but sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So love to just get a little insight from you on how you make those decisions and those jumps then and now, or maybe even looking back to what you did then.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think one thing is looking at my own history and looking at the history of others can be a big teacher for me. And sometimes I think those lessons are encouraging. Like it reminds me, hey, you did it then. These were some of the components of your success. You can apply that and likely get some of that same success again. Right. I can also borrow from what I see in others around me. And I think that's one of the things that I've really focused on in the last, oh, I don't know, Morgan, probably the last decade, is surrounding myself with the right people. And these are people that I trust, people that I respect, and that I will listen to. They are the people that I seek advice from. So I feel like that has made a difference for me also. So those parts, and then the other thing is one of the things I've learned about myself. I think you probably know a little bit about this. From that one event we went to together, but I'm very data driven. And so that's a little bit of the psychology hat I wear as a therapist too. I appreciate speed and I appreciate results. And I believe the way that I can get there and help others get there is gathering data on themselves. And so, where I link that to myself in this question is I have learned over the years that I'm pretty comfortable with risk. So people tend to be more cautious with risk or comfortable with risk. And we can measure that using data tools. And so since I know I'm more comfortable with risk, I know that I don't have a great need for a plan. That can be a great asset for me, but it can also be a blind spot. And that's where I have to look back at some of those other factors I just mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. Someone once told me you'll never outperform your current identity. And I think sometimes when you think about it that way of like, you have to change the people in the room. You have to listen to others that maybe you're like, oh, I know it all or I've got it. There's a change in your process and you can still be comfortable with risk to your point, like I am as well, and all those other things. But like you have to accept and take in other parts to make that data work.
Yes, yes, absolutely, no question.
So what I'd love to talk through that event that we went to. We were kind of mentioning before we jumped in,
Yeah.
and you explain it better than I, but I'll just kind of tee us up here. But the concept of splitters and blenders, and there's two different personalities of how you view your holistic life, right? Your work life, your family life, your home life, your whatever else is in your world. But I'd love for you to dive in on that because we've kind of weeks after still on this topic.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So, obviously, what you're referring to is I did a research briefing on International Women's Day this year. So, in early March, you and I were together, and I had culled through some really rich data from McKinsey and Lean In, as well as Forbes and Gallup. Those were our primary sources. And one of the things Gallup is especially looking at when we take a look at women in the workplace is where or where are they not thriving? Women, right? When we take a look at that. And when we take a look at thriving, we take a look at well being. And what Gallup is identifying is well being is really about the integration of work and life. And we know that well being is critical for maximum productivity. And so, out of that research has come this idea that for many women, they have a preference, and Gallup gave these titles of how they like to integrate work and life. Some women, we call them blenders, are women that they're good with it blending. And that could be blending throughout the day. It could be blending at hours overnight, which could be considered like off work hours for some. It also could be blending over a weekend. Okay. And so blenders are very comfortable and they prefer things ebbing and flowing and work and life commingling and coexisting. That's a blender. The other type of woman is one that Gallup labeled a splitter. And a splitter is a woman who really likes some definition between work and life. And what that could look like with a splitter, though, that could be from 9 to noon, she's only focused on work, and then from 1 to 5 or 8 p.m. There was no magic to the number. She's only focused on work, and then maybe when she goes home, it's only at home. Or I know some women that they may say, "Hey, between 5 and 9 p.m., I need it only to be home. But you know what? I like to pop back on email between 9 and 10 before I go to bed to get back onto work." that would still be a splitters mentality. And so what we talked about at International Women's Day is just this concept, right, of blenders and splitters. And we had a robust conversation in the room about the two. And Morgan, I know you have had your own insight, and if you'll share yours, I'll share mine.
Yes, absolutely. I have always taken pride in being a blender and being like, I can do 37 things at once. I can bounce and be accommodating and all these things. And probably the last year, year and a half, I am a splitter. I'm 100% a splitter. I here's my list, and when this time is done, like I just maybe it's I have more and different things on my plate with having small children, moving from being an employee and even a leadership employee to being a business owner, I think has transitioned some of this as well. But I love the terms uh, blender and splitter much better than work life balance,
Mhm.
because that is just so generic. And
Yeah.
this is how you actually operate to have be happy and joy and find balance. And that to me is a bigger deal, way bigger thing than, yeah, I have work life balance. Like
That's
it's
right.
just a bigger concept for me, even though it's a micro level concept.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and it makes me think about it. It's truly the concept of how do we integrate? So it's not if we integrate, it's how we integrate work and life. How do the two coexist? And when we're able to figure that out, right? One person at a time, that coexistence, that's where we can tap into well-being, which gets us to productivity, which gets us to thriving, which is synonymous to engagement, right? So that kind of wraps the whole conversation of what we've been talking about.
Very much so. Yes, I love it. I left that thinking about it. It stays in my brain from that event. And it's kind of how I look at my workday now, of like my calendar blocking is like, I can't let this run over because I'm going to get frustrated. I'm going to have a problem. Like it's going to cause more problems down the road. But again, two simple words change the game on that.
Right. Yeah, and just very briefly, my aha was, it was interesting, it came a day after, right? So we were all together, it was on a Friday. And so on that Saturday, the next day, I guess that was still on my mind. I wasn't consciously thinking about it, but it was still on my mind. And I had this big aha, and my aha, somewhat similar to yours, was wait a minute, I'm not a blender. I
Mm.
really thought I was. And I thought, "You're a splitter." Like, you were absolutely a splitter, and I don't know why I couldn't see it, because even when I was culling through the research on this, I really thought, "No, I'm a blender, there's no question about it." But then when I started taking a pause to consider some of my recent decisions about some things I said yes to and some things I said no to related to appointment times for something, I thought, "My gosh, you couldn't even see it in yourself." And so it was humbling and enlightening at the same time.
It's amazing. Those bold moments, those big moments come sometimes when you're having coffee or you're out walking the dog and you're like, where's a post-it when I need it to write this down and like process it, right? Like,
Yes.
but it does continuously come back to us. And so it'll always, if we miss the sign, it's amazing how our faith in universe brings it back to put it back in your lap in a different format, right? So I'd love to talk about the bold ideas of doing this without fear and failure. Talking
Mhm.
about being a splitter or a blender, there's no failure there, right? That's a self awareness. But we're building teams, we're trying to do things to get people to thrive and enjoy those 90,000 hours, they're spending at work. Like, how do we do that with big ideas and without the fear of failure mixed in?
Yeah, I love this question, and thank you for letting me think on it before this, because it was really good reflection. So, I'll try not to be too philosophical, but I've got to start there, okay, and then we'll get very pragmatic. Okay, this is my therapist hat on again. I don't know if it's possible to not fear failure. I'm gonna still be thinking on that, okay? But where my brain went, Morgan, was how do I define failure? And
Hmm.
what is failure? And so when I think about my own work team, I think one of the things that we've built some safety around is being willing and being able to be imperfect, especially because things run pretty quick on my team because I run with a fair amount of speed, and I have to moderate that speed at times so it doesn't rob us of high quality, because I also have a strong need and expectation for high quality. And so we always have to navigate how fast can we go and not sacrifice a result. And then how can we also explore in areas where we might not have 100% certainty when we are setting out, right? And I think that comes back to, I'm thinking of me and I'm thinking one of my other team members. I'm very comfortable with risk, doing something new, doing something we've never done before. She is very cautious with risk,
Mhm.
not very comfortable doing something new or something she has never done before. And so I framed your question within that context. And so for me, I think the way that I've been able to lead a team and an organization forward to do new things, to break the playbook, to be willing to go for it, even though I don't have all the answers. I think it comes back to some basics. And I think one is being really clear on what my vision is. Number two, it's having the right people in the right seat. Right, and then number 3, it is for me and each person to understand about themselves so they know how to leverage their drives and their talents so that we can move forward. And I'll share just one brief example. I remember years ago, there was a leader I was working with, and I had done a lot of work inside her organization. And then she called me in. She joked it's what she was calling couples counseling. It was for her and her work peer. They two worked very closely together. The one woman very comfortable with risk. The second woman more cautious with risk. The first woman said to me, "You need to." I'm just going to call the second woman Amy, right? So the first woman said, "I need you to help Amy get comfortable with risk so she doesn't fear risk." And I said to the first woman, "It's not how she's wired. I'm really good at what I do, and I can't change how she's wired. But what we can work with is knowing that she's cautious with risk and begin to explore and understand what mitigates the risk in her mind and how can we build her up in that area." And I think that's what part of my recipe for success has been, is just knowing that and tailoring my leadership based on each person I'm working with.
That's amazing. And I think that customization, if you will, to an extent, is what helps people feel valid and validated when they come into the office. And when it's like, I'm never going to get over this. But if you can, back to your point, going back to the data to say, but if we have 3 out of 5, I feel comfortable with that more. But can you give me that 3 out of 5 without having to ask or whatever it is, right? Like
Right.
it ties so much together, and then it's not an ongoing problem or situation. Love with the right people, right seats, and there's some trial and error there too.
Of course. Yeah, and it's hard.
It
It's
is.
hard when we think about hiring, when we think about knowing who we need and what we need. And I think as a leader, that is an area I've really grown in. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I'm a heck of a lot better than I was 14 years ago. And like, so if we kind of link this to failure, I've made a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I've made a handful of bad hires along the way. Were those failures? I'm not sure, right? Going back to the definition, there's a quote I love. I don't know who to give credit to, and I probably have slightly sliced this up a bit. But the quote says something like, "Failure isn't failure unless I fail to learn from it."
100%.
And I learned from each of those bad hires. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do that for me and my company, but it's also not easy on the person who's been placed in a role that they're not well fit for. So I have a lot of compassion for that as well. So I like to think about failure more as growth and exploration that we're doing very mindfully, right? This journey of life or work, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. And going back, even our conversation, we met a month ago, a month and a half ago. We're still talking about a topic. That's but that's how those failures, if you're still talking about them a month and a half later, or you've changed a process,
Yes.
man, that is huge. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's also a relief, like as a business owner, to be like, okay, I can do this better next time. I can continue to grow and do things differently.
You know, Morgan, this is making me think about there's a coaching client, a new coaching client of mine. It was probably the second or third session I had with her, and she came in and she was really frustrated about something with work. She runs her own company also, and just super high level. She had um, bid on some new work, and she won the bid. And then when she got into the work, she didn't know as much about that job as she thought she did. She had done some very similar work, but not that work exactly, and she had underbid also. So she had a couple of dynamics going on there. She had that she didn't fully know what she needed to know about the work. The money wasn't right, and number three, she couldn't get her staffing right either. So I mean, it was really a mess. And so we processed through that, and I remember one of the things I said to her, because I just kept listening, and I like to be one that listens long. Like, I wanna listen for everything I'm hearing here. And one thing I started hearing was she wasn't hearing it initially, but I thought I was hearing about all the lessons she was learning with
Mhm.
this really tough experience. And at the end of our session, I reflected some of that back to her. And I said, you know, what are some of the learnings? What are some of the takeaways? And when she was able to list them herself, I said, let's just sit with this rhetorical question. Is it maybe worth it? I said, because I don't know where else you could have gotten all of these learnings, not from another person, not from studying a book, not from going to a class. I said, I know this has been painful, but look at what you have on the other side of it. And it just makes me wonder the value if we are willing to be honest and reflective with ourselves during those hard times.
Absolutely. And going back to the people around us too, having someone like you to come in and help reflect. We get caught up in our own heads as business owners and entrepreneurs and or in the heat of the moment. And so having someone to listen long, I love that phrase, and also just hear it out and be able to reflect it back. That's amazing. So you mentioned your clients. So you work with individual business owners, large corporations on all sorts of coaching, speaking engagements, and internal engagements too of getting their teams to where they need to be. What's something in your industry that either you're really excited about and kind of changing the pace right now, or something that you're like, we're a little seeing this trend and maybe not loving it right now?
Yeah. So it really, the answer is going to take me back to where you and I met on March 7th, or it wasn't then, but the International Women's Day event. I think one of the things that we're not talking about enough is an insufficient number of women being present in managerial and senior leadership roles. And there are two things that are on my mind about that. The first is, so I'll just tap on engagement. Gallup's research consistently shows that female managers teams have higher engagement scores than male managers teams. Okay. And we know that when we think about how Gallup measures engagement, this is something I help clients with also. And we know that there are only 12 core workplace needs. And when those needs are met, business outcomes get better. And there are about 9 business outcomes that Gallup has been able to correlate that to. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing is that we know when women are part of management and senior leadership, we know that there is greater innovation, there are better results, and there are stronger workplace cultures. And I think we know this, Morgan, but we're not really grasping it and seeing it as a problem to solve. And I'm really passionate about that because women bring so much to the workplace. And we begin at entry level positions, pretty much 50% women, 50% men. And then we start losing women for a variety of reasons. And I think we each have a part to play in that. And that is not just every woman, but that is every man also. And we're not going to make changes until we really see this as an issue and that it is a problem that we can solve and it's a problem worth solving.
Absolutely. Back to the data, right? Where are we seeing these numbers and these drop offs and the drop off of the business and the productivity? It's amazing what that looks like. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things on our plate as females and in the workforce, business owners or employees. And not that there isn't on our male counterparts, but it's different. And it clearly is relating differently and hitting differently than others.
Yes, well, and that makes me think about the stats. So, what Gallup's research had also shown, McKinsey's as well, is that both men and women are burned out at work, but we know that women are 4 times as burned out at work as men are. And again, when we think about this, that is a key driver. It's one of the big reasons that women end up leaving. And so it just makes me wonder, what could a new future be? How much better could workplaces be? And when we know when people's work lives are better, and their personal lives have an opportunity to be better, and our communities have an opportunity to be better. And so I see that, there are elements of improvement in our world that could be better as we start making some shifts and changes in our workplaces. I'm really passionate about that, and I think we don't talk about it enough.
That's amazing. And it's such an important topic, and it's such a broad spanning topic. It's not one industry, one line of work. It's
Yeah,
a universal problem that McKinsey and Gallup have identified and pointed out multiple times, as you stated.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Boy, Grace, this was so amazing. I'm so happy to see you as always and just chat with you. You are doing just such amazing work and helping people get to their next stage and thrive, and the workforce as a whole, and supplying information to them, processes, and ways to get there. So, thank you for joining us today on Changing the Game podcast. I really appreciate it.
It was great to be with you, Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you.